I'm talking to Juliana Finch. Hi, Juliana. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, hi Sadie. I'm Juliana Finch. I'm a singer-songwriter, writer of other things, performer, and most recently, professional love note writer.
Yes.
um, and just generally identify as an imperfectionist, creative person, and all around wearer of pajamas right now.
Yes. Talk about the love note writing.
Yeah, I started this project almost a year ago, about a year ago. Um, where I was just writing like affirmations on giant post-it notes and placing them around and taking pictures of them. And then last year at this time, actually, I think it might have been today. I think April 7th is when it starts. There's this thing called the 100-day project, and I decided I was going to do one a day for 100 days. And it ended up kind of taking over my life in this great way where now I write a bi-monthly newsletter that's about like self-love. I call it radical self-love for imperfect people. And it's just called Hey, I Love You. And at the time, it was something that I started doing because I needed it and didn't know how it was going to resonate. And it really has seemed to resonate with a lot of people. And so I'm keeping it up as long as it seems to be something that's useful and helpful for people. Um, and it's been really awesome.
Cool. How do people start getting your newsletter?
I have a sign up form at heyiloveyou.co. Um, and that's pretty much all that's there right now. We'll work on that part later, but there's a sign up form there, and I have an Instagram account that's heyilove.you, and that has a link to it also. And I post the actual post-its that I do on there as well on Instagram. But the newsletter has a bunch of other stuff like feel good media recommendations and mental health sources, and kind of a little essay every time about taking care of yourself.
Cool. How are you taking care of yourself today?
Today, I took a shower and washed my hair. Thank you for the incentive to do that. I've been like just in a ponytail for 2 weeks,
Yep.
so it's good to do that. And I got out in the garden a little bit this morning. We are planting a whole lot of vegetables, and building things, making things. And I'm also reading a lot of escapist fiction right now. I normally read a little combination of fiction and nonfiction, but right now it's all just feel good, fantasy, silly stuff.
So, what are you reading right now?
I just finished The Unkindest Tide by Seanan McGuire, which is part of the Toby Day series, which is about like a detective who's a fairy changeling.
Awesome.
It's real silly and fun, and it's like the 13th book in the series.
Cool.
Um, so I'm on the hunt. I'm on the hunt for the next thing. If anybody has recommendations for a similar vibe of relatively low impact urban fantasy.
Right? All of the fiction that I've been reading has been more dystopian. So, it's not exactly upper type stuff.
That's my usual stuff, and I was like, this week I was like, I can't handle it.
Yeah, I hear ya totally. So, um, you're a writer of many things, a songwriter in particular, and a musician. So, how is this what you're doing as your primary job? And is
Yeah.
it what you expected to do as your primary job?
Oh gosh, like what I expected to do when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting because I think for most of my childhood, I really didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. I really loved doing theater and performing, especially in groups. I loved choir and I loved doing ensemble theater. And I never particularly thought like, oh, I'm going to be a songwriter. I'm going to be a writer. And then I knew that you might ask this. And so I went and found this thing that I had called My Book About Me. It's a Dr. Seuss book. I'm going to grab it because I
Oh,
found it.
yes.
Um, I filled this out when I was 6 years old. This is a really cute little book. And it's got all these questions like, how many teeth do you have? What is your address? Where do you live? Um, like you have to count your teeth and stuff like that. But there's one page where it's like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And the things that I circled were writer and singer,
Oh,
which is
cute.
so wild to me because I don't remember thinking about that. So it says when I grow up, I don't know if it's backwards or not on there. I want to be a singer,
Oh,
and I also circled writer right there, which
awesome.
is so wild to me that I found it just a couple of years ago because I wasn't trying to do that as a kid. Um, but I guess I was subconsciously. And like a lot of artists, I've done a whole lot of other things in between and in addition to, and um, side hustles and all of that stuff.
Yep,
Um, we all do a lot of things, you know. But
indeed.
yeah, I guess I always was sort of headed this way.
Right on. So, how is what's happening right now affecting um your life as a professional creative?
It's a little bit tough. Definitely a pivot. Summertime, spring and summer is usually like touring season. That's usually when most of the performing happens. And I'm also coming off of half of a year where I wasn't able to play or perform because I got a hand injury in October and had to have surgery. I couldn't feel most of my left hand.
Yikes.
So I wasn't playing guitar for months and months and months. And finally, last month, just started to be able to play again, or I guess in February, started to be able to play again. And now all of my gigs and all of the conference appearances and all the things that I have planned are done. They're all canceled.
Yeah.
Um, so, you know, that's disappointing, but I also feel really grateful for technology right now and the ability to do live streaming shows. I've been doing those for over a decade. So I feel lucky that I don't have to be learning the software right now.
Yeah, totally.
For the first time, I know a lot of my musician friends are now like, how do we do live streams? You know?
Yeah.
Um, so I'm pivoting to doing that more and also doing a lot of writing that people can read more, like essays and poetry and things like that. Um, yeah, it's put kind of a pause on things in a time when I was already on pause, so it feels a little bit strange. And I'm trying to find ways to make this time feel generative and feel creative, because I am finally feeling like I want to be doing that again after being, you know, I was burned out for about a year. And I think a lot of artists go through this cycle. So I like to talk about it a lot because I think it's important to recognize it's part of it. Where you're like, every few years, I'm like, I'm going to quit. I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah, totally. I'm
And
familiar
then
with
it
those
comes back,
feelings.
you know? Yeah, it's this normal cycle of like, fuck this, I don't want to do it anymore, versus like, actually, I have something I still feel like saying. And when my last album came out, I did have this feeling of like, maybe this is my last one, like ever. Maybe I'm done. Um, and I finally feel like I'm coming out of that and I'm feeling excited to write and work on things. So it's interesting to have that impulse and then be at home, not
Yeah,
out there playing.
totally. So when you're playing your streamed shows, are you doing that through your Patreon? Are you doing it on a website? Like how can people find you?
Yeah, so typically my Patreon subscribers always get a monthly online show that's just for them. And the past couple of weeks, I've been doing shows that are open to everyone. And I broadcast those on Crowdcast, and I usually put links to them. I put public links in my Patreon. They're usually up on my Facebook and up on Twitter, all the social media places. And I think I'm going to continue to do ones that are open to everyone and free throughout this process, just because people need art in their lives.
Yep.
And I think there are a lot of folks who aren't actively on the Patreon who are looking for ways to support artists and ways to like toss a buck in the tip jar. And that it means a lot to us who are out here doing something that, sometimes we feel isn't valued by society. I think this crisis has really made me realize that we are. When it comes down to it, people are shifting to putting their money toward the things they care about.
Yeah.
And that includes artists, which is awesome.
Yeah. I've It's interesting because, so many artists don't have a lot of the built-in support resources. Like unless they're people who do it purely as a hobby, they don't have employer sponsored healthcare. They don't have, a structured savings situation unless they're real adult about how they manage their money, and a lot of creatives aren't. And the it felt at the beginning of all this like it was going to be sort of a free fall for a lot of
Mhm.
creatives, and it's been really nice to see how communities are stepping up and supporting artists. And like here in Atlanta, I don't know about where you are, but here in Atlanta, like the city is trying to actively support artists right now. And so is that happening? Because you're not here in Atlanta, and like you're in a more what I consider to be more of a creative community
Yeah.
than how Atlanta is more corporate-y, I guess. So are you seeing that on sort of a local initiative level, or is it more grassroots for you?
There's a lot of grassroots movement here in Durham. I'm in North Carolina, for folks who don't know. And Central North Carolina there's a group called the North Star Church of the Arts, which is a really fantastic organization founded by the Freelon family. And they organized right away a Durham relief fund, artist relief fund. And I'm lucky, I'm privileged to be in a position where my partner has like a real grown up job. So I'm not in this, like, I have health care through that. But lots of folks have been donating to the relief fund, and that's been going directly to artists who apply for it. And there are some other initiatives that folks have to apply for. The main thing is getting artists information about it and getting it out there. But it is really heartening to see a lot of organizations coming together to support the folks who need it, and not just artists, but also, restaurant workers and service workers and people who aren't supported normally by their employers. And
Yeah.
if nothing else, I hope that this situation brings to light a lot of the ways in which employers are able to get away with a lot of stuff they shouldn't.
Yeah. And how 21st century American capitalism is just not it's not a dependable support system for people who are outside of this certain box.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um so are you wearing something with pockets?
Yeah. Usually. Yes. I had to check. I was like, what pants do I have on? I don't know.
Do you have anything in your pockets?
Let's find out. Yes.
What you got?
I have some hairpins,
All
some
right.
bobby pins, one of these. I've been growing my hair out for the first time in over a decade. And so I'm finally learning how to use these things because I had very, very short hair for a long time.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen
And
you
which
with
means
hair
I'm
this
now in the
long.
club that finds them everywhere.
Yes.
Well, I just picked these up in like a different room of the house. I was like, they're not supposed to be there. That's why they're in my pocket. And then maybe like a little too on the nose, there's a guitar pick
Yep.
in my other pocket. Most of my guitar picks end up in the laundry room at some point because I wash my clothes with these in the pockets all the time.
Yep. So, what all do you play?
I play guitar. I play a little bit of piano. I'm sitting at my piano right now. I don't play piano in front of other people generally. Sometimes my Patreon supporters get something that I've played on piano that's very first draft, very rough. But I've been trying to teach myself. I took piano lessons when I was 7, 8, and 9, and then I quit, and I wish I had never quit.
Yep.
So I'm trying as an adult now to relearn how to play. But mostly I play guitar. It's my primary instrument, and I sing. And I'm in a couple of other bands just as a vocalist, which is fun too, to get to do that sometimes. But for my own thing, it's usually guitar
Yeah.
and vocals.
So, when did you learn how to play guitar?
My dad gave me a guitar when I was 16, and I didn't touch it for another year. It just kind of sat in my room looking at me judgmentally.
Yeah.
And then I finally picked it up. I guess my senior year in high school is when I really started playing. I didn't take lessons. I'm all self-taught. I don't recommend that method to most people, but
Right.
that's what I did. And yeah, so I guess it's been 20 years or so. It's very strange to think about.
Yeah.
But mostly just listening to songs I liked and like teaching myself how to strum some chords and the songwriting started around the same time. I think of the guitar as like a tool that I use for self-expression more than I think of myself as a guitar player, if that makes sense. Like there are plenty of people who play the guitar a million times better than I do, but for me, it's a tool that I use to write songs.
So what's your songwriting process?
Usually, well, I journal every day. And so sometimes that journaling is self-reflection. Sometimes it's little snippets of a poem or a lyric or something that comes to me. I'm always like kind of eavesdropping on the world and trying to write down things that occur to me. And so usually if I feel like I want to have a writing session, I'll sit down with my journal and my notes and look at any snippets of something and then just sit down with my guitar and like play, like, and I mean that in the sense of being playful, like just seeing what happens, playing with the way words sound, the way chord progression sounds, and trying to express what it is I want to talk about. I can't write with anybody else in the house. So right now it's an interesting time because I have to tell my partner, like, can you just like be elsewhere? Can you go somewhere else so that I can sit down? Or I'll go outside and play with my guitar right now. So it's a little bit different, but typically I'm doing both at the same time, lyrics and music. A lot of people do those things separately. I'm usually sitting down and working out like a chorus and a verse at least with the instrument. And then once I have that and the general structure, I can just work on only lyrics after that. But usually I'm just sitting at the computer or the notebook with my guitar in my hand and playing around until something happens.
Yeah. How do you know? How do you know when it's good?
Oh, I don't know if I ever know if it's good.
Or is
I
that too
think
much of an existential question?
I think there's like a place where you feel like you're in the flow, where you feel like you're not entirely working to make it happen. It doesn't require as much. It's not that writing doesn't require effort. It's that there's a feeling of effortlessness that happens when you're in that creative flow and it's happening. And you don't feel like you have to bang your head against the wall or the page as often. And for me, that happens more often because I try to show up every day in some way and allow it to not happen. Meaning I have to allow myself to have days where there's nothing good happening.
Right. Yeah,
It's going to be
totally.
crap. Um, like I love Anne Lamott's chapter in Bird by Bird, which is a great book about writing. She has a chapter called Shitty First Drafts.
Yes.
And I think about that all the time because it's like you have to write, she describes that the good writing is like under all this bad writing and you have to write the bad stuff to get it out of the way.
Yep.
So just trying to be really forgiving and like let go. And then when it feels effortless, when it feels like something I'm excited about, that's how I know I'm sort of onto something. And sometimes it doesn't happen like that. And I have to put something down for a few weeks or a year or longer and come back to it later. I have a lot of drafts saved in my computer.
Yep. I believe it. So you write every day or you work on writing or creating every day. What other rituals are part of your daily routine?
I'm definitely a creature of routine. I love to have routines. Um, I didn't used to think of myself as a morning person, but I really am a morning person. Once I started working for myself, I realized that morning is like my sacred favorite time. And what I didn't like before was this idea of like, as soon as you wake up, you have to rush off to be somewhere.
Right.
That was the part of the morning that I resented and really kind of rebelled against. And so my own mornings are pretty slow. I get up and like make coffee and get all the animals wrangled. But then once sort of minutiae is settled for the day, I try to have some reflection time. I I have this little personal rule that's output before input, which means that I don't look at social media or my email right away until I have like written something down.
Oh, that's
And
rad. Yeah.
yeah, so I have to like sit with my journal. I'll try to like sit and look. I'm lucky to be in like a really beautiful place and we have this pasture and there's magnolia trees. It's beautiful. I'll try to like sit and look outside and write even a little bit and then look at my planner and look at my schedule and like have my first cup of coffee really slowly doing that, kind of setting an intention for the day. Um, And that's probably the most important ritual that I have. And then I also read before bed every night, which is also an important ritual for me to like wind down and be away from, again, unplugging from, the input news and social media and even television. Sometimes I'm like, all right, I need a break from the screens and just have my little Kindle screen that's not quite as bright.
Yep.
And wind down that way. So really they're like bookends. My rituals are these bookends to the day. I have like a morning ritual and an evening ritual. And right now, especially, it's been really important to maintain those because I think everyone's schedules are kind of upended. And even for those of us who work from home and are used to being home a lot, it's different. It's different.
Yeah.
And
It's
different.
totally different.
It feels different. Yeah. And so I had gotten really kind of tied up in social media for a couple weeks where I'm not usually, because I did want to use it to be in touch with everyone and we're not able to hang out with each other. So I was using it for like the good stuff, but I realized that my own anxiety level had kind of ramped up, and it was because I wasn't doing these things, these rituals anymore. I didn't have my bookends and I didn't know where I was or when I was.
Yeah. I think that's definitely going around. Like people, it's like there was that thing that was going around a couple of days ago with some news station had like a new segment with like, what day is it? And it had a little jingle. And it was like, it's Wednesday. And then the jingle came back.
Yeah, what day is it? Nobody knows. Time means nothing.
Yeah. Like people are communicating at odd hours and everybody's sleep schedule has gotten like maybe more to their natural rhythm or something. And it's so interesting to see how with only a couple weeks people have transformed into these whole new creatures.
Yeah, you're like, I have no idea. I have no idea what day it is. So it is important to me to have that. Like this week, I felt a kind of normalcy coming back for myself. And I think it is because I'm like enforcing this routine and this ritual that I had just let go before when I was living on Oreos and Cheetos for a week and a half.
But that's okay. Oreos and Cheetos sometimes you need. So.
Absolutely. No judgment. I'm not even judging myself about it, but that's what happened. That's the reality.
So you tour, you travel a lot. Where's the most inspirational place you've ever been?
Oh, gosh. I will say one of my favorite places on the planet is in Sicily. My mom is from Italy. She's from southern Italy, Calabria, which actually, if you saw that video of the Italian mayors yelling at people, the mayor of my mom's town is like the last one on that little cliff. It's hilarious. I recommend you find it. But across the water is Sicily. And my cousin a few years ago took me around to a bunch of different places. And there is a theater there in a town called Taormina, which is like this little cliffside town that used to be a resort town years and years ago. It still kind of is, but like it was one of those places celebrities would go because nobody knew who they were or cared.
Right.
And there's a Greek theater that's been there for thousands of years at this point. And it's still used, the amphitheater is still used for like big concerts there. Wow. And there is this, you can go there and just hang out, and go sit in the audience there. And when I was first hiking up the road to go there, it looked like part of it had crumbled down. And, it's this ancient Greek building, of course, like you're expecting part of it to be ruined. And it was like right in the middle, there's this U-shaped part that was just missing. And I realized when I got into the audience and looked at where the stage is, that was intentionally built that way because you can see the mountains and the ocean right behind it from the audience. So it's like this built-in backdrop that all the actors had.
Oh, wow, that's rad.
Taking advantage of. And it's been kept that way forever. Like I think Elton John played there at this amphitheater. Like it's a place where they still have concerts, and getting to go there and just realize that like performers have been using this space for thousands of years. It really makes you feel small in a good way. I think feeling small in terms of perspective is really healthy sometimes. and that like this has been happening for thousands of years and it will continue to happen, regardless of what I do personally.
Right. Oh,
But it's
that's
really
awesome.
beautiful. And if you ever have a chance to see it, you could probably Google pictures of it. It's really phenomenal looking.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, what's the best piece of advice that anyone has ever given you?
I'm glad that you asked really easy softball questions.
Right? It's supposed to be.
The best piece of advice. Oh gosh, I've gotten so much good advice that
Or
I probably
the,
haven't listened to most of the time.
well, there's that. Or like
Um,
what advice do you come back to?
yeah, something that my mom said to me when I was a teenager, and I was having a hard time with a social group, was to consider the source. And the way that she meant it at the time was like, you know, they're not worth you being this upset about it. That type of person is somebody you don't have to worry about. But I come back to it over and over again when I think about where people are coming from. If somebody comes at me with something negative, or if they're in pain, what is the source of that comment? What's the source of that behavior? And it's usually pain. It's usually suffering. We're all doing that on some level. And that helps me to like be okay and not take personally a lot of stuff that maybe I would have taken personally even a few years ago. And so that phrase, consider the source, pops up a lot. And I try to use that as like a little mantra of like relaxing around other people's emotional reactions.
I'd never contextualized it like that before. That's a great way to process that. Yeah.
A lot of therapy and years of meditation.
Yes. So, is there anything new that you're working on learning right now? Oh, you're
Yeah,
learning how to play piano. Well, there's that. But
I am learning piano. I just enrolled in like an online poetry workshop because I'm trying to get back to. I mean, I've been writing poems for years, but not in a sort of structural workshopy way. And I think that can be helpful sometimes. I think it's helpful once you get to a certain point. It's not necessarily like I think a lot of people will take classes as a way to avoid actually having to write. But like
yeah.
this is like a writing program online. I figured I've got a little bit of time. Um, so I just started doing that. And what else? I have Duolingo installed to try to learn some Irish, but I haven't really done it yet.
Irish. Why Irish?
I grew up I grew up fascinated by Celtic cultures and mythology, and my initial forays into music were actually in the traditional Irish and Scottish music world. So I've been singing, I've sung songs in Irish or other forms of Gaelic over the years a few times, and I know what I'm singing. I think it's really important, to know what you're saying
Right.
when you're singing in another language, but not enough that I could just go to Ireland, the Gaelic speaking part of Ireland, and have a conversation. And I always just wanted to be able to do that. So yeah, it's not exactly like a super useful language, but it's super interesting to me, and it's fun because once you learn how to pronounce, it always looks like there's way too many consonants in a word
Yeah.
in Gaelic languages, and once you kind of figure out how it works, it's kind of fun to puzzle out like how do you say this.
Yeah. Because it doesn't have the same structural. I mean, English has like all of its exceptions to its rules and everything, but like it doesn't have the same structure as like a lot of the Romance languages. And
Hmm.
it's like, what all?
Yeah, it's kind of closer to Germanic, but then also has its own rules.
Yeah. um, so have you started?
I have done like very few lessons. The app is really cool, but it's
Yeah.
one of those things where if I put it down for 5 seconds, I've like totally forgotten
Yeah.
everything. So I just need to start over again, I think. Um, but I am able to pronounce all the names of the scotches that we have in our house, which is
Yes. That's
that's
an
an
important
important
thing.
skill.
So on that, what's your favorite cocktail?
Oh gosh, I love classic cocktails, um, largely because I don't like super sweet stuff, and those tend to be like pure mixers, mostly just a citrus or something. I love an aviation. That's one of my favorite cocktails. Um, and just straight up, I love to play with old fashions. Like I play with the recipe a lot, where we'll make simple syrups here at home, different flavors, and there's one that we make here. Speaking of Gaelic, that we call the Auld Fashion, which is like spelled the Scottish way, AULD, and I use Scotch for the base instead of rye. And then I have a spiced simple syrup that I put in it, and a
That
little lemon
sounds
peel. But I like playing with stuff
that sounds
at
so
home.
good.
I got plenty of time to play with cocktails right now for sure.
Right? Yeah.
And I like bitters. I have like a big bitters collection, and a lot of times I'll just put that in like a soda water too, like in a plain soda, and have that. And I like to gather stuff. I have a lot of herbs and flowers around the property, so I'll make syrups out of things. Last year I made a honeysuckle syrup that was awesome.
Ooh, yeah.
And that was really good with some gin and some lemon.
Totally.
Yeah.
So tell us about your property because it sounds magical.
We're working on it. So we got this. I've been here in Central North Carolina for 4 years next week. And this is about 2.5 acres that we have here. And it feels like it's kind of urban. It's only 10 minutes from downtown Durham, which I love. But as soon as you get, past our driveway, it's kind of this little oasis. Um, and at some point it was farmed a little bit. So for livestock. So there's a barn in the back and there's a pasture in the back of the house that I'm trying to fill in gradually with other things because I don't want just a flat piece of grass. So we're growing some trees and a few fruit trees. We have peaches and dogwoods and magnolias and all kinds of stuff. I'm looking this way because it's right outside of where I am. Um, and I've been growing herbs since we've been here. This will be the first year that I have a vegetable garden because I had to build a fence that's totally enclosed because there's also a herd of deer that visits on a regular basis. And the
Yeah.
first year I planted vegetables, they ate everything. They even ate the things that are deer resistant.
Yep,
These
same
deer cannot be
here.
resisted.
They decimated everything I planted last year.
Yeah, they don't really go after the herbs as much and the flowers. I have a big pollinator garden in the front. Um, and they'll chew on those a little, but I think they don't like the taste of that stuff. So they tend to stay away from that. Um, and so I've had a lot of medicinal herbs and culinary herbs for a while. And I'm looking forward to actually growing some veggies finally because I have a fence that I can keep
Yay!
them out.
So totally changing gears, only not. Um, Part of the creative process is dealing with rejection. So share a time that you dealt with rejection and how that has affected your creative process.
I think that being a theater kid, you get a lot of training with rejection early on. Because even more so than music and maybe some other types of performance, I think being an actor and auditioning, you're going to be rejected most of the time. And it hurts, it stings the first few times. And I was lucky to have some good teachers and some folks who helped me frame it in a way that you realize that it's not really about you most of the time. It's not about your skill or your ability. It's about whether you're fitting the particular hole in the production that person needs to fill. And I've been on the other side of the table too and worked in casting a little bit and like genuinely knowing that the people in that room want you to do well and they are looking for you to solve a problem that they have. And it's not like a personal judgment
Right.
on you. Um, there are definitely still times that I will play a show at a bar where like nobody is listening. Nobody is paying attention. They do not care if I'm there. Um, and most of the time I have some pretty good resilience around that. Every once in a while I play a show where I'm like making a grocery list in my head while I'm playing because if they're not going to care, I'm not going to care either, right?
Right.
And I try not to get too bogged down in that. Um, but yeah, getting told no a lot as a writer and as an actor, kind of trains you to bounce it back from that a little bit more. And it's definitely part of the industry in a way that I think maybe a lot of other industries. It's like having a job interview every day and not getting
Yeah.
a job, right? Um, so yeah, I've dealt with a lot of little rejections here and there, and I think part of the way I've personally dealt with it is just to make my own work. And I think a lot of performers have done that and make your own show, produce your own thing, make the work that you want to see in the world and not wait for somebody to give you permission
Yep.
to do it, you know?
Totally. So, how how did you come to having this be what you did? Like, did you go to school? What, like how what prepared you to end up here?
I It took me a long time to sort of claim this. I didn't want to do it as a profession for a really long time. And when I started playing my music out in coffee shops and stuff as a young person, it was really just another way to express myself. It was something I felt compelled to do just to like share what I was making, but I didn't necessarily want to do that, as a career. And I remember when I was in Western North Carolina going to school and starting to play out, people would come up to me after and be like, "Oh, I want to buy one of your CDs." And I didn't have a CD. I was like, "What? I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're asking for." And eventually, like people would get a little bit irritated. They're like, "Well, you need to be recording this stuff so we can buy it." And so I was like, "Okay, I guess I'll record a thing people can buy." And that was honestly the way I approached it for probably the first few years um, that I was doing it. Well, okay, people want a T-shirt. I guess I'll make a T-shirt or whatever. Instead of it being like I want to do this thing. Um, and I don't really know why the switch flipped, but there became a point. I was working a job that I really loved in a tech company that I still really love, um, where I started to resent the time that work, which was creative and exciting and really awesome, was taking away from the time that I wanted to be making my own stuff. And it got to a point where the ratio just flipped, where I wanted to be spending as much time as I possibly could doing that, as opposed to the things that were actually, making my money so I tried to figure out how to shift those things a little bit. And then it was in 2012 when I started working for myself full time. And it was a combination of playing shows and touring and releasing music and writing other things and then doing a few little freelance things on the side like most artists do.
Yep.
Um, I was a nanny for a long time. I was a doula, which I also really loved for a while, and doing that and just sort of piecing together this life that allowed me to have some freedom over my time, which I think was the most important thing, was where I could decide where my time and attention went at any given point. Um, and that's where I'm at. I don't think that every artist, I don't think I'm any realer of an artist than somebody who is working a full-time job doing something else. I think that's a dangerous idea. I think it's an idea that invalidates a lot of artists, that in order to be real, you have to be full-time. For me personally, my freedom of attention and time is really vital to my creative process. And so I sacrifice a lot of other stuff in order to make that possible. But by all means, if you can have a full-time job as an accountant and also write your novel and have that creative energy, like, please do that. Please have health insurance and a full pantry and like,
Right.
please go for it.
Yeah. I think a lot of creative communities battle, that like whether you can truly be, if you have the square day job or what, and is that, yeah, invalidating you as a creative. And I've seen some really heated conversations about it, And yeah, I have always found that like when I had a full-time day job, it made it so that I didn't have any energy to be creative whenever I
Yeah.
came home. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's for sure true of some folks. And then, others seem to have endless energy, and I am very jealous of them, uh, where they can do those things and they absolutely should. And they're totally real. They're totally real and valid artists.
Yep.
And I think that anybody who would tell them that they're not is maybe still in this place where there's this love affair with the idea of a miserable artist, of
Yes.
art coming from misery and from suffering. And
Right.
that's not where it comes from, y'all. Like, well-fed artists make better work than starving artists.
Yes. Agreed. Totally. So, speaking of well fed, what's the most memorable meal you've ever eaten?
Oh gosh, I love food. I love to eat. Um, I would say relatively recently, I had a pretty memorable meal where there is a restaurant in the Seattle area called the Herb Farm, and they do a 13 course dinner with
Oh,
wine pairings, and it's always got a theme. And we had made plans like over a year ago to go in January, and got to go to this place, and it was a truffle dinner. So every course had some element of truffles in it.
wow.
And they're not huge. It's not 13 courses of like,
Yeah.
giant things, but it took about 4 hours, and it was amazing, and not at all. This place is kind of amazing because they create this very luxury experience, but it does not at all feel pretentious. Like, you go in, you really feel like you're in somebody's house, and they're just, taking care of you, and they're excited to share stuff with you. I love any meal that includes like long conversation and a lot of time, and that it's not necessarily about eating, it's about sharing an experience. Um, and I think a lot of our positive memories of food are about who we were eating with and not what we were eating necessarily. Um, so yeah, I've had a lot of really wonderful, memorable meals. But that's probably the most recent, like, super standout thing. So if you ever have a chance to go there,
Sounds
highly
amazing.
recommend. Yeah, it was awesome. Definitely not something I could do every week or even month in
Right.
terms of like the monetary investment, but it was definitely like a once in a lifetime kind of meal.
Yeah. So, does your partner travel with you often?
No, unfortunately, but we have a 2 week rule where we don't we don't spend more than 2 weeks apart, at a time. So a couple years ago when I was touring with the album, I was gone off and on for about 4 months, where I would sort of pop home for a weekend and then go back out for a leg of the tour. And uh, part of the way through, he actually flew out to meet me, on the West Coast to spend the weekend, because it was going to be like 3.5 or 4 weeks or something. So we make it work. Um, I learned about that from a couple of film people that I knew who have managed to have like successful relationships despite having crazy shooting schedules.
Yep.
And so I try to maintain like not having too much time apart, because it's not great for me. I need that time to like nurture relationships and stuff like that. Every once in a while we get to travel together. Um, Mostly it's juggling. He's got to travel for work a little bit too, so it's juggling, making sure somebody's home to take care of the fur babies.
Yep. The other children that like you can't exactly send to a grandma's house.
Yeah,
Like,
every once in a while, but there's four of them here, so we can't do that.
yeah.
I can't put that on my mom.
What was the first record you ever bought?
Okay, I have two answers to this question, because the first album I actually owned, I stole from my brother, so I didn't buy
Yes.
it. I have an older brother who had mostly okay taste in music, and every once in a while, like really great taste in music. and I stole Janet Jackson's Control from him.
Hell yeah.
So that was my first album. The first one that I bought with my own money was the soundtrack to Disney's The Little Mermaid. Like saved up money to buy that. I really wanted to be Flounder when I grew up. That was probably one of the things I wanted to be. Was like the funny sidekick character, the voiceover in a Disney cartoon. Maybe one day, call me Pixar. Yeah, we'll make it happen.
Right? Or you can just make your own like overdub of some sort of like random get something that's like archival footage and create your own like cut and paste storyline and
Yeah, I've got a little time right now, so maybe I will.
yeah, everyone can learn to be a video editor while you're at it.
Gosh, I wish I could. I mean, I really should learn how to do that. I'm so impatient with production software, and I really admire a lot of my fellow musicians who produce their own stuff. I love the process of going into a studio and having a producer to work with, and like that part of it is a whole amazing process, but it's not something you can just do
Right.
anytime you want to record something. And I'm fine with doing like two tracks. You know, here's a track of me on guitar, and here's a couple vocal tracks, maybe a couple little other things. But the software generally is really intimidating. And the same thing with video software. I'm like, I can do super basic stuff, but it would be. I'm in awe of editors in
Yeah.
general. Just watching them work, I'm like, how do you do that?
Yeah, and
It's awesome.
the like visualization that they're able to do and to see how to get to the endpoint is yeah, that's a skill I don't possess either. So,
Yeah, like I can write it. You know, I've written scripts, and I'm working on some screenplays and stuff, and I can see it in my head and I can write it, but the actual like mechanical process of like being able to take all of this information and all of these shots and everything and put it together in a way that makes that script make sense is pretty amazing, I think, and a pretty underrated job
yeah,
uh, for most
definitely.
film goers, you know.
Yep.
Like most of the best performance jobs, like if you're doing your job well, nobody notices you. Like that's
Yes,
great.
totally. What's the what's the most memorable gig you've played?
Memorable in a positive way.
Sure, one or the
I'll
other.
do
Or
memorable in
both.
a positive way. In 2008, I played the Falcon Ridge Folk Festival, and those people are amazing, and they really love musicians and they love artists. And by those people, I mean not just the attendees, but the organizers. And that was one of the first times I played an event, like a big event, like a festival, and felt truly taken care of and felt truly cared about. Um, it's such a weird thing to remember, but I remember the food for the artists
Oh, yeah.
was amazing. Like the food tent was there's an omelet station and you could make your own salad every day. And it was a camping festival, so you're there for 3 or 4 days. Um, and just feeling like anywhere I went, I had my little artist badge. Vendors were like, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so happy to see you." You know, and just being treated like a professional when I was still pretty young in my career at this level, and being able to share a stage with some people that I admire the most. I got to meet and have a great conversation with Dar Williams at that festival, and she was such a huge influence on me at the time. And being able to just sit and have a conversation with her, you know, was
Yeah.
incredible. And then it was also the first time that I stood on a stage and looked out at like a couple thousand people. And that's not an experience you get to have very often as a performer
Right.
at my level. I'm usually playing pretty small clubs and bars, or playing in my living room where it's just cats and people on the internet.
Right.
So that was pretty wild. That was a pretty amazing experience, and I would love to go back there one day. It's really well organized and fun, and everybody there just really cares about the music and cares about art. It's awesome.
That sounds wonderful. And yeah, people, I don't think people understand, especially people who haven't been on the production performer side of a festival. I don't think they understand how important the catering is.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, especially when you're there for days, you know.
Yeah,
Like I can only eat so many funnel cakes before my body starts to shut down.
totally.
I mean, it's a
There's,
lot of funnel cakes,
yeah.
but there is a limit.
Funnel
Yeah, just
cakes
being able
with
to have
like
like
those
a salad
strawberry on top of them. And yeah, uh-huh.
and like there's no way you can't wear black at all if you're eating
No,
a funnel cake.
sugar.
Just powdered sugar everywhere.
Yeah. My partner has worked a festival in Florida, I think 3 years. And part of why we keep coming back and working it is the amazing artist catering that the people who run the kitchen are real people, and you can personally thank them, and
Yeah.
it's amazing food. And yeah, it's like, yes, artists want to be a part of, yeah, this is part of our compensation. This great
Yeah,
food.
absolutely. And just feeling valued, you know, in that
Yeah,
way.
absolutely. Yeah, feeling valued is totally what it is. Um, so adjacent to that, what's the weirdest gig you've ever played?
I have played, let's see, what is the weirdest gig I've ever played? I've done like some some corporate gigs that I was like, why, how did you find out about me and why am I here? Um, that turned out to be strangely wonderful. Um, I have played music um, at a lot of farmers markets, and now that's sort of more popular. But I remember like early on pitching the Morningside Farmers Market in Atlanta. They didn't really used to have music, and I sent an email and I was like, "Hey, I'm a musician and I really love farmers," because I was working on a farm part time. It's like, "Can I come play?" And they were like, "You want to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and play?" And I was like, "Yeah, I did." And I made some of the best tips there. You know, it was good.
Yeah.
Um, but there have been some gigs where I'm like, how do you know who I am? Where people will just like call me out of nowhere. Um, one weird one that I loved a couple years ago was that I got to be a ceremony musician for a wedding, which is not very unusual on its own, except that I was a surprise to the couple getting married. So they
Oh,
didn't know
wow.
that I was going to be there. And I literally was hiding like in the bushes of their backyard, waiting to come in. And I got to play their ceremony because they had chosen one of my songs as their ceremony song. And I knew their officiant really well. And so she called me and she was like, "Will you come and do this live and be a surprise?" And I love surprises. I love being part of surprises. So um, that was like weird in a really wonderful, delightful way.
Oh, that's such a fantastic gift, too. Wow.
Yeah, mostly it was trying not to cry and sing at the same time.
Right. Totally. Yes.
Pretty much every time I get asked to be part of a wedding, that's where it's at. Where I'm like, I will try to sing this, but if I'm not looking at you, it's because I can't sing and cry at the same time. I'm very sentimental.
So we're almost at our time. Um, so if you had to if you had to identify a motto or a slogan or a mantra that you really live by, what would that be?
There's something I come back to over and over again. I probably say it to myself like at least once a day. And I got it from a book by Tara Brach called Radical Acceptance, where it's just this state being in a state of allowance of things that are happening. And what Tara says is this too. That's it. So like when something comes up and you're not necessarily prepared to deal with it, or you have a big emotion, you know, this too, like this is allowed too. This is part of my experience too. Um, and I try to use that with positive experiences too. You know, when I'm experiencing any kind of big feeling, it's like, yeah, this is all part of this big, messy, strange life that we have, you know, and so that and in my meditation practice is something I come back to over and over again. That's real home base for me. Um, and yeah, it's just those two words, this too.
That's lovely. Thank you. And stick around for a second, but we're going to say goodbye to everyone. And thank you, everyone. And next time.